My stepdaughter shoved me so hard that my new knee folded underneath me. I hit the hardwood floor, heard the serving spoon skid across the room, and before I could even catch my breath, she pointed at my chair. "That seat belongs to my mom. Get out." I looked up at my husband, waiting for him to help me. Instead, Mark sighed and said, "Elaine, don't make a scene." That was the moment my marriage ended. Not in court, not with divorce papers. Right there on my dining room floor on Christmas Day, while 14 people sat around the table I'd spent 2 days preparing for. If you'd asked me a year earlier whether something like that could ever happen in my house, I would have laughed. I wasn't naive. I knew Mark's daughter, Jenna, had never truly accepted me. She was 33 years old enough to know better, yet somehow still convinced I had stolen a life that should have belonged to her mother. But I honestly believed there were lines adults simply didn't cross. I was wrong. Christmas dinner was supposed to start at 6. By 4 that afternoon, my hands already ached from peeling potatoes, slicing vegetables, and kneading dough. Arthritis has a funny way of reminding you exactly how old you are. Every twist of a jar lid becomes a negotiation. I'd learned to work slower, sit down for 5 minutes, stand back up, stretch my fingers, keep going. 6 months earlier, I'd had my left knee replaced, after years of pretending it wasn't that bad. The surgery helped, but I still couldn't stay on my feet all day without paying for it afterward. That morning, I had told myself the dinner was worth it. Mark loved having everyone together. His mother always expected homemade rolls. His sister insisted nobody could make sweet potatoes like mine. So I cooked. Honey-baked ham, green bean casserole, homemade yeast rolls. My mother-in-law's pecan pie recipe. By 5:30, the house smelled exactly the way Christmas was supposed to smell. Warm, comfortable, safe. Or so I thought. Jenna texted at 5:42. "Running late, bringing someone." I assumed she'd invited a friend. Instead, the front door opened at 6:15 and in walked Denise, Mark's ex-wife. I stood there holding a serving bowl for a second longer than I probably should have. Denise looked just as surprised to see me. "You didn't know?" she asked. I slowly looked at Mark. He shrugged. Jenna didn't want her mother spending Christmas alone. That would have been nice information to have yesterday, or this morning, or any time before she walked through my front door. Still, Christmas wasn't the day I wanted to embarrass anybody. So I smiled. "Well, let's get another place setting." Denise looked uncomfortable. "I don't want to intrude." "It's fine," I said. And I meant it. I truly did. I pulled another chair from my office, grabbed another plate, and squeezed one more setting around the dining table. For a few minutes, everything almost felt normal. People poured wine. My brother-in-law complained about Colts football. Mark's mother asked whether anyone wanted extra gravy. I carried the gravy boat in from the kitchen. That's when I noticed something. My chair was gone. Well, not gone, occupied. Denise was sitting beside Mark, in my place. The little name card I'd made that morning with Elaine written in gold ink had disappeared. I honestly thought somebody had mixed things up. I smiled. "Denise, I think there was a little confusion." She immediately started getting up. "Oh goodness, I didn't realize." Before she could stand, Jenna stepped between us. "No." The room went quiet. She looked straight at me. "That seat belongs to my mother." I blinked. "It belongs to whoever's eating dinner. I'll just move another chair." "No," her voice got louder. "It was Mom's seat before you came along." I looked at Mark. He was cutting his ham. Seriously, cutting his ham. I took one slow breath. "Jenna." "I don't want to argue." "It's Christmas." She folded her arms. "Then stop acting like this is your place." I frowned. "My place?" She nodded toward the dining room. "My mom should have been sitting there years ago." For one brief second, I actually felt sorry for her. Divorce does strange things to children, even grown children. It teaches them stories that become impossible to let go of. So I answered quietly, "I'm not asking anybody to choose sides. I'm asking to sit at my own dinner table." She stepped closer. close enough that I could smell peppermint on her breath. Then she placed both hands against my shoulders and shoved me, hard. I never saw it coming. My left foot caught the edge of the rug, my replaced knee buckled instantly. The side of my hip slammed into the hardwood floor. Pain shot all the way down my leg. The gravy boat slipped from my hand. It didn't break. It just rolled across the floor, leaving a thin brown trail over the wood I'd refinished 3 summers earlier. Nobody spoke, not for several seconds. I tried pushing myself up. My wrist gave out. The room stayed silent. Finally, Mark sighed, not rushed over, not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Jenna, what have you done?" Just a sigh, then, "Elaine, don't make a scene." I honestly thought I'd misheard him. I stared at my husband. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. His mother finally spoke. "Let's all calm down." His sister looked down at her plate. Someone quietly cleared their throat. Denise stood halfway out of her chair. "Oh my God." Jenna grabbed her arm. "Mom." "Stay." Denise hesitated, then sat back down. That hurt almost as much as the fall. I reached for the edge of the buffet cabinet. Standing wasn't graceful anymore. After knee replacement surgery, you don't simply jump up. You calculate every movement, where your weight goes, which leg takes the pressure, whether your balance will hold. It took me almost 20 seconds. Nobody offered a hand. When I finally stood, I looked directly at Mark. "Are you seriously going to sit there after your daughter shoved me?" He rubbed his forehead. "We'll talk later." "No," I said it so quietly, I'm not sure anyone else heard. "There won't be a later." He frowned. "What does that mean?" I surprised myself. I smiled, not because I was happy, not because I'd forgiven anyone, because something inside me had become perfectly clear. For months, little things had bothered me. Questions about how much equity was left in the house. Transfers from our joint checking account labeled consulting. Jenna casually mentioning her business would finally be fully funded after Christmas. Mark always placing his phone face down whenever I walked into the room. I had printed a few bank statements, copied some emails, saved a draft home equity application I'd found on the printer. I kept telling myself I was overthinking everything, standing there with my knee throbbing, watching my husband defend the person who just knocked me to the floor. I realized I hadn't been imagining anything. I simply hadn't wanted to believe it. I walked upstairs. Every stair hurt. I packed slowly, prescription bottles, compression gloves, a sweater, my laptop. Then I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside sat a blue accordion folder, unsigned loan paperwork, property valuation reports I'd never requested, bank statements, email printouts, nothing dramatic. Just enough to tell me I'd been asking the right questions all along. I called my neighbor Ruth. She answered on the second ring. "Everything okay?" No, she didn't ask anything else. "I'll be there in 5. As I came back downstairs carrying one overnight bag, Mark looked up. "Where are you going?" I looked around the dining room one last time. The ham, the candles, the untouched rolls, the people pretending nothing extraordinary had happened. Then I looked back at him. "Somewhere I'm allowed to sit down." Nobody followed me outside. 3 hours later, I sat in an examination room at IU Health North while a nurse wrapped my wrist. The x-rays showed no damage to my knee replacement, just a severe bruise, a sprain, and a warning to rest. Before she left the room, the nurse paused. "Mrs. Dalton, do you feel safe going home?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. That frightened me more than the fall itself. Later that night, sitting at Ruth's kitchen table, I opened my phone and watched the security camera footage from the dining room. There it was, the shove, the silence. Mark telling me not to make a scene. I watched it twice. Then I opened the blue folder. I hadn't walked away carrying the document they needed. I'd walked away carrying the proof that they'd been planning something behind my back for weeks. And for the first time since I married Mark, I stopped wondering whether I was imagining things. The morning after Christmas, I woke up in Ruth's guest room, with my left knee stiff and swollen beneath the blanket. For a few seconds, I didn't remember why I was there. Then I saw the blue accordion folder on the chair beside the bed. Everything came back. The shove, the silence, Mark cutting his ham while I struggled to stand. I sat up slowly and reached for my phone. There were 11 missed calls. 7 from Mark, 3 from Jenna, 1 from Mark's mother. Not one voicemail asked whether I was hurt. Mark's first message said, "Elaine, this has gone far enough. Come home so we can talk like adults." His second said, "You embarrassed everybody by leaving." The third came 20 minutes later. "Where is the blue folder?" That was when I stopped listening. Ruth appeared in the doorway carrying coffee and 2 pieces of toast. She was wearing a faded Indianapolis 500 sweatshirt and slippers shaped like black cats. "You look terrible," she said. "Good morning to you, too." "I mean emotionally. Physically, you've looked worse." I gave her a look. She set the tray down. "That was a joke. A weak one, but I'm retired. Standards have slipped." I laughed despite myself, then immediately felt guilty for laughing. That was the strange part. My marriage was cracking open, and the world still contained coffee, toast, and Ruth's terrible jokes. Life rarely respects the mood of the room. I called Susan Patel at 8:30. Susan had handled my parents' estate years earlier and helped place the house into a revocable trust after my mother died. She knew the property had been mine before Mark and I married. She also knew I had a habit of trying to solve emotional problems by being reasonable long after reason had stopped working. I expected to leave a voicemail because it was December 26th. She answered on the 4th ring. "Elaine? I'm sorry to call during the holiday." "You only call during holidays when something is wrong." That nearly undid me. I told her everything, not dramatically, just facts: the shove, the hospital, the video, the loan paperwork, the appraisal I had never requested. When I finished, Susan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do not empty the joint account. Do not throw his belongings outside. Do not change every lock until we confirm his occupancy rights." I hadn't said I was going to do any of that. "You were a principal for 32 years. You have the tone." "What tone?" "The tone that says somebody is about to lose access to the building." I looked at Ruth. She nodded as if Susan had described me perfectly. Susan told me to preserve the security footage in more than one place and write down everything I remembered while it was still fresh. She also told me to notify the lender in writing that I had not authorized any lien or loan involving my house. "Can they proceed without me?" I asked. "Not if the trust owns the house and you're the only authorized trustee, but we need to stop assumptions before they harden into paperwork." That sentence stayed with me. Stop assumptions before they harden into paperwork. It could have described my entire marriage. By 10:30, I had emailed the bank's lending department, copied Susan, and attached the first page of the trust certification. I did not accuse Mark of fraud. I simply stated that I had not approved any use of the property and would not sign the application. The response came later that afternoon. The proposed loan would be placed on hold pending direct authorization from me. No courtroom, no dramatic injunction. Just one missing consent they could not legally replace. I also opened a checking account in my own name and redirected my next pension deposit there. I left the joint account alone, exactly as Susan instructed. That was harder than it sounds. When you discover someone has been moving money behind your back, every instinct tells you to grab what you can and run, but anger is expensive when lawyers have to clean it up later. That afternoon, I finally examined the statements in the blue folder. 3 months earlier, Mark had transferred $9,800 from our joint checking account to an account connected to Jenna's company, Hearth and Air. The description said consulting services. I remembered asking him about it. He had been standing at the kitchen island, opening a bottle of wine. "Short-term bridge," he said. "She'll repay it within 30 days. "Why does a candle company need nearly $10,000 in consulting?" "Packaging, branding, expansion stuff. That isn't consulting. He smiled like I was being difficult. You're getting stuck on labels. The money was never repaid. There were other smaller transfers too. $2,400, $1,750, $3,200. Each one had a vague description: marketing, vendor support, inventory adjustment. At the time, Mark always had an explanation ready. His commission check was late. Jenna had a cash flow problem. The funds would come back next month. They never did. I should have pushed harder. That thought circled my mind all day. Then another thought followed it. I had pushed. Mark had simply trained me to treat every answer as proof that I was unreasonable for asking. By evening, I was tired enough to cry over a jar of pasta sauce. My wrist hurt when I tried to open it. I twisted once, then twice, then pressed the lid against the counter. Nothing. Ruth took it from me and opened it with one turn. I stared at the jar. I may be almost 60, living in someone else's guest room and unable to open my own dinner. Ruth poured the sauce into a saucepan. You're 58, temporarily staying with your best friend, and recovering from being knocked down by a grown woman with bad impulse control. That sounds worse. It's more accurate. After dinner, I watched the Christmas video again. I told myself I was checking the timestamp. Really, I was watching the people. Mark's sister froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. His mother looked at Jenna, then at me, then down at the table. Denise started to rise. Mark never moved. 10 seconds. That was all. 10 seconds while I lay on the floor and everyone decided whether helping me would make Christmas uncomfortable. At 9:14 the next morning, Mark called. This time, I answered. Elaine, he said, already irritated. Where are you? With Ruth. You need to come home. Did you call to ask how my knee is? A pause. I know you're fine. The hospital would have contacted me if it was serious. That's not how hospitals work. You know what I mean. No, Mark, I don't think I do anymore. He exhaled loudly. Jenna made one mistake. She shoved me. She was emotional. Having Denise there stirred up old issues. You invited Denise without telling me. I didn't invite her. Jenna did. And you let your daughter decide who sits in my chair, who comes into my home, and whether I'm allowed to object after she puts me on the floor. See, this is what I mean. You're turning it into something bigger. Then his voice softened. Not with concern, with calculation. Did you contact the bank? I looked at the folder on Ruth's table. Did you call because you miss your wife, or because the lender called you? Silence. Then he said, That investment affects all of us. I never agreed to invest. We discussed using family real estate. You discussed it. I listened. You're jeopardizing Jenna's employees. How many employees does she have? Another pause. I already knew the answer. 2 part-time workers. One was Jenna's college roommate. Mark changed direction. Where is the folder? Safe. You had no right to take my business documents. They were in my office beside an appraisal of my house. His tone sharpened. Our house. No, mine. He hung up. On December 30th, 5 days after Christmas, the calls started before 8 in the morning. Jenna called 6 times. Mark called 9. His mother left 3 messages about forgiveness. By noon, I had 23 missed calls. I answered none of them. At 2:15, a voicemail appeared from Denise. Her voice sounded tired. Elaine, I need to explain why I came to dinner, and I think Mark used my name the same way he planned to use your house. I listened twice. Then I called her back. 5 days after they told me not to make a scene, the money stopped moving. That was when Mark's first wife asked whether I wanted to know what he had promised her. Denise chose the Panera on East 116th Street because, as she put it, neither of us is likely to throw a bread bowl in public. I arrived 10 minutes early, old habit. After 32 years in education, I still showed up before meetings, chose the chair with the clearest view of the door, and kept a pen in my purse even when I had no intention of taking notes. Denise walked in wearing a camel-colored coat and carrying a black leather tote large enough to hold payroll records for a small country. She spotted me near the back. For a second, neither of us smiled. Then she sat down and said, "I owe you an apology." That would be a good place to start. She nodded. Fair enough. We had coffee between us and enough tension to heat it without electricity. Denise wrapped both hands around her cup. "I didn't know Jenna planned to confront you." "You still stayed seated." Her face tightened. "Yes." I waited. She looked toward the window before answering. "I told myself standing up would make it worse, that Jenna was already upset, that Mark would handle it. Mark watched me get off the floor by myself." "I know." There was no defense in her voice that time, just shame. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. "I also liked believing he wanted me there." I stared at her. Denise gave a small, bitter laugh. Not one of my finer moments. She explained that Jenna had been telling her for months that Mark was unhappy with me, that he regretted the divorce, that he wanted the three of them to feel like a family again. According to Jenna, Christmas dinner was supposed to be the beginning of a reconciliation. "With you still hosting it?" I asked. "I know how that sounds. It sounds insane." It was. "And you came anyway." I believed the part I wanted to believe. That answer was ugly, but honest. And after a week of Mark twisting every fact until I felt unreasonable, honesty, even unflattering honesty, was almost refreshing. Denise reached into her tote and pulled out her phone. "Mark has been texting me for about 4 months." She opened a thread and slid the phone across the table. The message near the top read, "You're the only person who ever understood the man behind the desk." I stared at it. Then I opened my own phone and found a message from Mark sent 3 weeks earlier. "You're the only person who understands the man behind the suit." I placed the phones side by side. Denise read both. Her mouth opened slightly, then she leaned back. Apparently he becomes a completely different man depending on the furniture. I laughed before I could stop myself. Not a polite laugh, a real one. The woman at the next table glanced over. For 10 seconds, Denise and I were no longer current wife and former wife. We were 2 middle-aged women discovering that the same man had recycled his emotional material with minor office decor changes. Then the humor faded. "What else did he tell you?" I asked. "That Jenna's company was about to receive serious funding. That he wanted me involved because I understand operations." "You manage a dental office?" "I manage payroll, insurance billing, vendor contracts, compliance forms, and 3 hygienists who all believe the supply closet belongs to them personally." "That's more business experience than Jenna has." Denise gave me a tired look. That may have been his point. Several weeks earlier, Jenna had emailed her a spreadsheet and asked her to check whether the vendor costs looked reasonable. Denise had glanced through it after work. Nothing seemed unusual enough to raise an alarm, and Jenna had sent the file through a shared folder connected to Hearth and Air. After my call, Denise opened the link again. This time, there was a new presentation inside. She pulled a tablet from her bag and turned it toward me. The title slide read, "Family Legacy Fund." Underneath, in smaller print, a privately backed expansion platform for Hearth and Air. The presentation was polished, too polished. Soft photographs of luxury kitchens, shelves filled with cream-colored candles, charts showing projected growth. Phrases like intergenerational stability, trusted family leadership, and asset-supported expansion. One slide said, "Anchored by established residential real estate and committed family participation." My stomach tightened. It never named my house. It didn't need to. The real estate value listed in the financial summary was within a few $1,000s of the appraisal Mark had hidden in my office. "That's my property value," I said. "I thought so." Another slide listed leadership roles. Mark was shown as strategic director, Jenna as founder and creative lead. Denise Dalton appeared under Operations and Financial Oversight. Did you agree to that? I asked. No. Did you sign anything? Jenna sent me a form to confirm I was reviewing the budget. I didn't sign it. She kept texting that it was just for internal records. Denise enlarged the final pages. There, under Financial Review, was the name Graham Pike, CPA, retired. Who is he? A former client at the dental office. He helped Jenna clean up her bookkeeping last summer. Did he prepare these projections? I called him yesterday. And? He used language I won't repeat in Panera. I raised an eyebrow. Denise almost smiled. He reviewed one spreadsheet 6 months ago. He never approved this presentation. He never gave permission for his name to appear on it. That was the moment the whole scheme changed shape. Until then, I had thought Mark wanted to pressure me into backing Jenna's failing business. This was larger, not larger in a movie villain sense. Larger in the quiet, believable way people commit serious wrongdoing while convincing themselves they're merely presenting the best version of an opportunity. My property implied financial security. Denise's job implied competent oversight. Graham's name implied professional approval. No single sentence had to be an obvious lie. Everyone in the room just had to misunderstand in the same profitable direction. When is this presentation being used? I asked. Denise scrolled to an invitation. January 15th, brunch at the Ritz-Charles. I recognized several names on the guest list. Mark's older cousin, who had recently sold a warehouse, a dentist Denise worked with, 2 commercial property clients, people with money, people who trusted Mark. He told me it was a family announcement, Denise said. He told them it was an investment meeting. He told everyone a slightly different version. That's how he operates. I heard the certainty in my voice and hated that it had taken me 7 years to say it. We met Susan later that afternoon in her office near Keystone at the Crossing. She reviewed the presentation without interrupting. Then she removed her glasses. This is concerning, but we stay precise. Denise crossed her arms. He used our names. Yes, and we prove exactly how. We don't call him a criminal in a room full of people unless law enforcement has already done that for us. Susan made a list. My trust records. The lender's written confirmation, Denise's email history, Graham's written statement, messages in which Mark described the funding as nearly secured, joint account transfers into Hearth and Air. Then Susan looked at me. You should also prepare yourself for the possibility that not all the money comes back. It was taken without my agreement. Mark had legal access to the joint account. That doesn't make his behavior acceptable, but it may make the issue marital dissipation rather than theft. I hated that answer. Real life has a cruel habit of using complicated words where your emotions want a simple one. He took it. Give it back. Instead, we had accountings, disclosures, tracing, intent, settlement leverage. By the 3rd hour, my fingers were aching badly. I wore compression gloves while sorting printouts at Ruth's kitchen table. The gloves helped, but not enough. A stack of statements slipped from my hand and scattered across the floor. I bent down. My knee stopped me halfway. The pain was sharp and humiliating. I stood there gripping the table while tears came into my eyes. Not because of the paper, because I was tired of needing help. Denise, who had come over with copies of the shared files, quietly knelt and gathered the pages. Neither of us spoke for a minute. Then I said, I don't want to become your friend just because we married the same liar. She placed the documents back in order. Good, I'm not ready to exchange Christmas cards. That almost made me laugh again. By the time she left, we had a plan. We would not warn Mark. He expected Denise at the brunch because her presence made his story believable. He expected me to stay away because embarrassment had always kept me quiet. This time, he had misunderstood both women. Mark thought one wife would provide the property and the other would provide credibility. He never considered what might happen if we compared notes. By January 15th, the bruise on my hip had faded from purple to a sickly yellow, but my knee still tightened whenever I stood too long. Susan told me I didn't have to attend the brunch. You can send a written statement, she said. You don't owe anyone a performance. She was right. I still went. Not because I wanted revenge in front of an audience, because Mark had built the entire event around the assumption that I would stay home, embarrassed and quiet, while he explained my absence for me. I had let him do that too many times. The Ritz-Charles sits just north of Indianapolis, the kind of place people choose when they want an ordinary business pitch to feel important. White tablecloths, tall windows, staff moving quietly between rooms with silver coffee pots. The private room had been decorated in cream and gold. Jenna had arranged candles everywhere. On the registration table, along the windows, around the projector screen. Each one had a label printed in elegant black lettering. Old money, Sunday cashmere, inherited confidence. A larger candle near the podium was called generational wealth. Jenna had lit almost all of them. The room smelled like vanilla, pine needles, orange peel, leather, and something faintly smoky. Graham Pike stood beside me near the entrance. He leaned closer and whispered, "It smells like a department store having a nervous breakdown." I pressed my lips together to keep from laughing. Susan gave both of us a warning look. There were about 30 people in the room. Relatives, business contacts, a few local investors, people Mark knew through commercial real estate. Mark stood near the screen in a navy suit, shaking hands and introducing Jenna as the creative force behind the family's next chapter. His mother was at one of the front tables telling anyone who would listen that I'd been under stress since my surgery. Then she saw me. Her smile disappeared. The room didn't go silent all at once. It happened in pieces. One conversation stopped, then another. A cousin turned in his chair. Someone near the coffee station whispered my name. Mark looked toward the entrance. For half a second, the polished expression fell off his face. Then it returned. He crossed the room quickly, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Elaine. Mark. He glanced at Susan, then at Graham. This is a private family event. I looked around at the investors holding printed presentations. It has a registration table. His jaw tightened. This is not the place for a personal disagreement. Then you shouldn't have used my private property to promote a public investment. Before he could answer, the doors opened behind me. Denise walked in wearing a dark green suit and carrying the same enormous black tote from Panera. Jenna saw her and immediately relaxed. "Mom, thank God." Denise didn't go to her. She walked past Jenna and sat at the table beside mine. That was when Mark understood he had a problem. Still, he went ahead with the presentation. He had probably spent too many years rescuing bad deals with confidence to believe this one was beyond saving. The first slides showed hearth and air products in spotless kitchens that looked as though no one had ever cooked in them. Jenna talked about expansion, wholesale partnerships, a second retail location, an online subscription box. Then Mark took over. He described the Family Legacy Fund as a privately backed opportunity anchored by established residential real estate and committed family participation. The language was careful, nothing specific enough to sound like a direct promise, everything suggestive enough to create one. A man named Howard Klein, who had sold 2 warehouses the previous year, raised his hand. "Is the real estate component already committed?" Mark smiled. "The family has been aligned on the concept for months. We're completing routine documentation now." That was the sentence we had been waiting for. I raised my hand. Mark ignored me. I kept it raised. Old habits again. After years in school administration, I knew the power of waiting silently until someone had no choice but to acknowledge you. Finally, Mark said, "Elaine, perhaps we can discuss questions afterward." "No, this one belongs in the room." I stood carefully, using the table for balance, every face turned toward me. I am the sole trustee and owner of the residential property being implied in this presentation. I did not pledge it, I did not authorize it, and I never agreed to invest in Hearth and Air. Susan moved quietly around the room, handing short copies of the trust summary and the lender's confirmation to the 3 prospective investors. Mark gave a small laugh. "This is a marital misunderstanding." Howard looked at the paper in front of him. "You just said the family was aligned." We discussed multiple possibilities. I looked directly at him. "You ordered an appraisal of my house without telling me." "That was preliminary." "You sent draft loan documents to my office." "For discussion." "You told the lender the property would support the first phase." Mark spread his hands. Again, nothing was final. He was doing what he always did, leaving just enough space around each statement to crawl backward through it. One of the investors closed his presentation folder. Mark saw it and changed tactics. "My wife has been under considerable emotional strain since her surgery." There it was. Not a lie, not exactly, just a useful explanation for why no one should believe me. I nodded to Susan. She connected my phone to the room's screen. The security video began. There was my dining room, the Christmas table. Jenna stepping toward me, the shove, my body hitting the floor, then Mark's voice, "Elaine, don't make a scene." The clip lasted less than 30 seconds. It was enough. No one spoke when the screen went dark. Mark's sister, seated near the back, covered her mouth with one hand. She had been there. Watching herself do nothing seemed to affect her more than watching Jenna push me. Mark's mother broke the silence. "That video has no context." Denise turned toward her. "What context improves pushing a woman with a replaced knee?" Jenna stood. "She was provoking me." I looked at her. "I asked for another chair." "You always make everything sound innocent." Mark stepped in quickly. "This has nothing to do with the business." "It has everything to do with why I reviewed the documents you wanted me to sign," I said. He looked toward the investors. "This is clearly a coordinated attempt to embarrass me." Denise reached into her tote. "No, Mark, this is coordinated fact-checking." She pulled out 2 printed pages. "I'd like to read something." Mark's face changed. "Denise, don't." She read his message to me first. "You're the only person who understands the man behind the suit." Then she read the one he had sent her. "You're the only person who ever understood the man behind the desk." For 1 second, no one reacted. Then Mark's sister said, "You sent both of them the furniture speech?" Someone laughed. Then another person. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Mark could survive anger. He knew how to redirect anger. Humiliation was harder. His face turned red. These private messages have been taken out of context. Denise folded the pages. "What is the correct context? Office supply romance?" Even I had to look down. The room loosened for a moment. Then Graham stood. He was 70, soft-spoken, and wore the same gray suit he had worn to his retirement dinner 5 years earlier. That made him more believable than anything Mark had put on the screen. "My name appears in these materials as having reviewed the financial projections," Graham said. "I did not prepare them, approve them, or authorize the use of my name." The room changed again. The family drama had made people uncomfortable. This made them alert. Howard looked at Mark. "Who verified the revenue figures?" Mark turned toward Jenna. "She supplied the operating data." Jenna stared at him. "You built the deck." "Based on your numbers." "You said Graham had reviewed everything." "I said he had reviewed the books." 6 months ago, Graham said. "One spreadsheet. That is not the same thing." Another investor gathered his papers and stood. "I'm out." Mark moved toward him. "Let's not make a rushed decision." The man buttoned his coat. "I'm not rushing, I'm correcting." The second investor said he would not discuss funding without independently verified statements. The third asked Susan for her card. Jenna's breathing became fast and shallow. She turned on me. "You did this because you hate me." "No, you wanted to destroy my company. Your company was already in trouble." Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed sharp. "You could have helped." I was willing to look at a real business plan. I was never willing to gamble my home on numbers nobody verified. You're not family. I felt that one. Not because I believed it. Because I had spent years trying to prove the opposite. I said family doesn't mean unlimited access to someone else's money, and it doesn't give you permission to put your hands on them. Mark's mother stood abruptly. You have humiliated this entire family. I looked around the room. No, I corrected what these people were told before they wrote checks. Jenna grabbed her purse and headed for the exit. On the way, she struck the edge of the display table. Several candles rolled onto the carpet. The large one labeled Generational Wealth came to rest beside the unpaid catering invoice. No one moved to pick it up. Mark approached me after the room began clearing. His voice was low. You've made a serious mistake. Maybe once that sentence would have frightened me. That day, it sounded tired. Your lawyer will hear from mine on Monday. Then I walked outside. The January air hit my face. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip my cane with both of them. Denise followed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked, did we go too far? She looked back through the glass doors at Mark standing alone beside the projector screen. Too far would have been letting them invest. She was right, but stopping the deal took one afternoon. Untangling my life from Mark took 8 more months. People like to imagine that once you expose a lie, everything falls neatly into place. It doesn't. The brunch ended in less than 2 hours. The divorce took 8 months. Some days I thought the legal process was designed by people who had never actually been married. Every answer created 3 new questions. Every financial statement led to another request for documents. Every signature seemed to require another signature. If you're looking for the dramatic version where my lawyer walked into court, delivered one brilliant speech, and I walked out victorious before lunch, I'm afraid this isn't that story. Real life is slower, much slower. The first mediation session was in February. Susan warned me beforehand. Today isn't about justice. What is it about? Paperwork. She wasn't wrong. For nearly 6 hours, we discussed bank statements, retirement accounts, credit card balances, and every transfer Mark had made into Jenna's business. The mediator wasn't interested in who had been cruel. He wanted numbers, dates, receipts, proof. At one point, Mark insisted the money sent to Hearth and Air had simply been family gifts. Susan slid a spreadsheet across the table. It becomes difficult to call something a gift, she said calmly, when the same account required Mrs. Dalton's pension deposits to cover mortgage payments and household expenses immediately afterward. The room became very quiet. Mark looked away. That happened often during mediation. He rarely admitted anything. He simply stopped arguing once the documents became impossible to explain. The legal bills were painful, not devastating, just painful enough that every time I wrote another check, I wondered whether peace would have been cheaper. Then, I'd remember lying on my own dining room floor while 14 people watched. Peace had already become expensive. I'd simply been the only one paying for it. Physically, recovery wasn't as simple as I expected either. Stress has an interesting relationship with pain. My orthopedic surgeon told me the knee replacement itself looked excellent. The hardware is fine, he said after reviewing new x-rays. Your muscles aren't. Months of tension had changed the way I walked. Without realizing it, I'd begun protecting the injured leg, putting extra strain on my hip and lower back. So I returned to physical therapy. Again. I won't pretend I enjoyed it. There is nothing glamorous about trying to balance on one foot while a therapist half your age tells you to activate muscles you forgot existed. But every week became slightly easier. Susan used to say legal cases are won one document at a time. Physical therapy felt similar, one careful step at a time. Ruth convinced me to join her water aerobics class at the Mognon Community Center. The first morning I almost turned around in the parking lot. Most of the women already knew one another. Several walked with canes. One arrived carrying an oxygen tank. Another joked that she'd had more replacement parts than a used Buick. I suddenly realized something. Nobody there was pretending to be young. Nobody apologized for hurting. Nobody acted embarrassed by aging. We were simply living. The instructor asked us to introduce ourselves. When I mentioned my recent knee surgery, a cheerful woman in her 70s patted my shoulder. "Honey," she said, "none of us came here with the original equipment." The entire class laughed. So did I. For the first time in months, the laughter didn't hurt. March brought another surprise, a voicemail from Jenna. I almost deleted it. Instead, I listened. "You happy now?" She sounded exhausted. "The store might close." I didn't answer. A second message arrived later that evening. "You destroyed everything." Still no apology. Still my fault. Susan advised me not to respond. "She isn't calling to communicate," Susan said. "She's calling to relocate responsibility." That sentence stayed with me. Relocate responsibility. It described Jenna almost perfectly. By April, Hearth and Air had lost its storefront. The landlord terminated the lease after repeated late payments. Most of the remaining inventory went into a storage unit on the north side of Indianapolis. Mark couldn't rescue the business anymore. He was struggling himself. His brokerage had placed him on administrative leave while reviewing complaints about the investment presentation and his use of business relationships during private fundraising. A month later, they ended his employment. Not because he lost money for the company, because he had lost something almost impossible to restore: credibility. Late in May, Jenna asked to meet. Susan encouraged me to choose a public place. We met at a small cafe near Carmel City Center. She looked different, thinner, more tired, less certain. "I shouldn't have pushed you," she began. Then came the word I expected. "But," I raised one hand. "No," she stopped. "I'll listen to an apology. I won't listen to an explanation pretending to be one." She stared into her coffee. Finally, she whispered, "You never understood what Mom and Dad's divorce did to me." I probably didn't. I took a sip of tea. "But your childhood didn't push me." "You did." She looked angry again, then frustrated, then simply defeated. We left 20 minutes later without resolving anything. Oddly enough, I considered that progress. For the first time, neither of us had shouted. 3 weeks later, she called again. This time, her voice sounded different, quieter. "Can we try once more?" We met at the same cafe. She didn't order coffee, neither did I. She looked directly at me. "I pushed you." I waited. "Dad did nothing." Another pause. "And afterward?" She swallowed hard. "I blamed you because blaming him meant admitting I'd been wrong about him." There it was. Not perfection, just honesty. Sometimes honesty is enough to begin. I told her forgiveness wasn't a light switch. Neither was trust. If we were going to have any relationship at all, there would have to be boundaries, real ones, counseling, no surprise visits, no requests for money, no pretending Christmas never happened. She agreed. Whether she would keep those promises remained to be seen, but at least we were finally discussing reality instead of fantasy. Mark reached out exactly once after the divorce became final. Not to me, to Denise. She forwarded me the screenshot. His message read, "You're the only person who ever understood the man behind the desk." Denise added one line beneath it. "He still hasn't updated the script." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Some habits really are impossible to break. Our divorce was finalized in August. The house remained mine. So did my pension. The trust stayed exactly as my parents intended. The money transferred into Jenna's business was accounted for during the property settlement. I didn't recover every dollar. Life doesn't always return everything people take from you. Sometimes it simply stops them from taking anymore. That turned out to be enough. The following Christmas looked nothing like the one before. Smaller, quieter, kinder. Ruth came. 2 retired teachers I had known for years came. Denise brought her sister. There was plenty of food, far fewer people, and absolutely no tension hiding beneath polite conversation. A week earlier, I'd replaced my old dining chairs. Not because of bad memories, because chairs with sturdy arms made it easier to stand without straining my knee. Halfway through dinner, Ruth looked around the table. "So," she smiled, "which chair is yours?" I looked at the people gathered in my home, people who respected one another, people who didn't mistake kindness for permission. Then I smiled back. They all are. It's my house. Sometimes people ask whether revenge made me happy. No, revenge wasn't the point. The point was refusing to spend the rest of my life financing people who believed my patience was something they owned. Looking back now, I don't regret leaving Christmas dinner. I regret waiting so many years before believing what people's actions had been trying to tell me. If you've ever had to draw a boundary with someone you loved, you know how lonely it can feel at first. But sometimes the hardest decision becomes the one that gives you your life back. If my story reminded you of your own, I'd love to hear it. You never know who might find courage in something you've lived through.